to go.
You're going to Tetra Tetra.
So, like I said, you can relax. I'm gonna read you a children's story. I am not, as you know, an elementary school teacher. Therefore, I will do my best
You gotta
to
make the different
play the
voices.
characters like
Yeah.
you know they
Bellos,
should be.
Then last year you read like
Yes, I did. Same
a
one.
real children's
This is the same one.
book.
Wait,
You read like
no.
It was last semester you read a book.
You read the Three Little Pigs.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's-
yes. This is a real one too. However, I don't have the actual book. It's a copy. So, unfortunately, I am going to show you the pictures. I want you to look at the pictures because when you're doing a children's book, you know that's part of it. This one's called "Terrible Things" by Eve Bunting. Okay. Terrible Things by Eve Bunting. The clearing in the woods was home to the small forest creatures. The birds and the squirrels shared the trees. The rabbits and the porcupines shared the shade beneath the trees, and the frogs and the fish shared the cool brown waters of the forest pond. They were content until the day the terrible things came. So in this one you can see them chilling. They're hanging out. Things are good. Little rabbits saw their terrible shadows before he saw them. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, and their shadows blotted out the sun.
Oh.
We have come for every creature that has feathers on its back, the terrible things thundered. Oh, well, we don't have feathers, the frog said. Nor we, said the squirrels. Nor we, said the porcupines. And nor we, said the rabbits. The little fish leaped from the water to show the shine of their scales, but the birds twittered nervously in the tops of the trees. Feathers. They rose in the air and then screamed away into the blue of the sky. But the terrible things had brought their terrible nets, and flung them high and caught the birds and carried them away. The other forest creatures talked nervously among themselves. Those birds were always too noisy, old porcupine said. Good riddance, I say. There's more in the trees now. There's more room in the trees now, the squirrel said. Why did the terrible things want the birds, little rabbit asked. What's wrong with feathers? Well, we mustn't ask, big rabbit said. The terrible things don't need a reason. Just be glad that it wasn't us that they wanted. Now there were no birds to sing in the clearing, but life went on almost as before, until the day the terrible things came back. Little Rabbit heard the thump of their terrible feet before they came into sight. We have come for every bushy-tailed creature who lives in the clearing, the terrible things thundered. Oh, well, we have no tails, the frog said. Nor do we, not real tails, the porcupine said. The little fish leaped from the water to show the smooth shine of their fin tails, and the rabbits turned their rumps so that the terrible things could see for themselves. Our tails are round and furry, they said. By no means are they bushy. What are they talking about? Squirrels. The squirrels chittered their fear and ran high into the treetops. But the terrible things swung their terrible nets higher than the squirrels could run and wider than the squirrels could leap, and they caught them all and carried them away. So here's the squirrels scurrying away or trying to get away. Those squirrels were greedy, Big Rabbit said, always storing away things for themselves and never sharing. But why did the terrible things take them away, Little Rabbit asked. Do the terrible things want the clearing for themselves? No, they have their own place, Big Rabbit said, but the terrible things don't need a reason. Just mind your own business, Little Rabbit. We don't want them to get mad at us. Now there were no birds to sing or squirrels to chitter in the trees, but life in the clearing went on almost as before, until the day the terrible things came again. Little Rabbit heard the rumble of their terrible voices. We have come for every creature that swims, the terrible things thundered. Oh, we can't swim, the rabbit said quickly. And we can't swim, the porcupine said. The frogs dived deep in the forest pool. Ripples spiraled like corkscrews on the dark brown water. Little fish darted this way and that in streaks of silver. But the terrible things threw their terrible nets down into the depths, and they dragged up the dripping frogs and the shimmering fish and carried them away. Why did the terrible things take them? Little Rabbit asked. What did the frogs and the fish do to them? Probably nothing, Big Rabbit said, but the terrible things don't need a reason. Many creatures dislike frogs, lumpy, slimy things, and fish are so cold and unfriendly. They never talk to any of us. Now there are no birds to sing, no squirrels to chitter, no frogs to croak, no fish to play in the forest pool. A nervous silence filled the clearing. But life went on almost as usual until the day the terrible things came back. Little rabbits smelled their terrible smell before they came into sight. The rabbits and the porcupines looked everywhere except at each other. We have come for every creature that sprouts quills, the terrible things thundered. The rabbits stopped quivering. We don't have quills, they said, fluffing their soft white fur. The porcupines bristled with all their strength, but the terrible things covered them with the curl of their terrible nets, and the porcupines hung in them like a spider's web as the terrible things carried them away. Those porcupines always were bad-tempered, Big Rabbit said shakily, prickly, stickly things. This time, Little Rabbit didn't ask why. By now, he knew that the terrible things didn't need a reason. The smell still filled the clearing, though the terrible things had gone. I liked it better when there were all kinds of creatures in our clearing, he said, and I think that we should move. What if the terrible things come back? Nonsense, Big Rabbit said. Why should we move? This has always been our home. And the terrible things won't come back. We are the white rabbits. It couldn't happen to us. As day followed, peaceful day, Little Rabbit thought Big Rabbit must be right, until the day the terrible things came back. Little Rabbit saw the gleam of their terrible eyes through the forest darkness, and he smelled again the terrible smell. This is my favorite, because you can see their eyes in the forest. The evil eyes, of course. We have come for every creature that is white, the terrible things thundered. There are no white creatures here but us, Big Rabbit said. We have come for you, the terrible things said. The rabbits scampered in every direction. Help! They screamed, somebody help! But there was no one left to help, and the big circling necks dropped over them, and the terrible things carried them away. All but Little Rabbit, who was little enough to hide in a pile of rocks by the pond and smart enough to stay so still that the terrible things thought he was a rock himself. If you look really close, you can see him. When they had all gone, Little Rabbit crept into the middle of the empty clearing. I should have tried to help the other rabbits, he thought. If only we creatures had stuck together, it could have been different. Sadly, Little Rabbit left the clearing. He'd go tell other forest creatures about the terrible things, and he hoped someone would listen. Okay. Every children's story has a moral. You guys know what a moral is? What is the moral of this specific story?
Helping.
What's that? There's a... One more time?
Helping.
Helping. Okay.
Sticking together.
What's that?
Sticking together.
Sticking together. Okay. What else? You guys live today? What is it reference? Yeah.
Jews and Nazism.
Jews and what?
Nazi.
And Nazism? What's the whole time period that's called when the Jews were being persecuted and killed? The Holocaust, right? So I didn't tell you that because I wanted you to come up with your own conclusions. I'll stay over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read you part of the. I'm going to read you what Eve Bunting put in the beginning of her book that I did not read to you on purpose. Okay, and then I'll make some analogies and I'll see if it makes sense for you. In Europe during World War II, many people looked the other way while terrible things happened. They pretended not to know that their neighbors were being taken away and locked in concentration camps. They pretended not to hear their cries for help. The Nazis killed millions of Jews and others in the Holocaust. If everyone had stood together at the first sign of evil, would this have happened? Standing up for what you know is right is not always easy, especially if the one that you face is bigger and stronger than you. It is easier to look the other way, but if you do, terrible things can happen. Okay? How many of you guys have ever seen I think it's the second Spider-Man movie, and Spider-Man, what's his name again? Parker? Peter Parker?
Yeah.
He's in love with Mary Jane, or whatever her name is, and she kind of gives him an ultimatum. You guys remember the ultimatum, like with Austria and Serbia? Like, you either do this or else. You remember that? So she gives him an ultimatum. She's like, either you're going to be Spider-Man, or you're going to be my boyfriend. You got to pick, which is kind of tough. You know, I mean, that's why it's an ultimatum, right? You have to choose. And I always remember this, and this always reminds me when I read the story, because Spider-Man has powers. He's strong. He can help people, right? But do you remember the part when how many people have seen it again? Do you remember the part where he's walking down the street, and he looks down an alley, and this two guys are mugging this other guy, and they're beating the crap out of him? You remember that? Well, what does he do? He walks away. Did he have the power, though, to help him?
Yes.
Absolutely. What did his uncle say to him in the first movie? Great power comes, great responsibility, right? You know, so, you know, use your power first, you know, to begin with for good things. We know that the Nazis did not do that, and they had a lot of power based on fear. But Peter Parker could have helped, and he chose not to. Have you ever been in a situation where you've been with friends, and you were in a predicament where your friends wanted to do something that wasn't quite, you knew it wasn't right, but you did it anyway because of peer pressure? I mean, come on. Raise your hand if you've ever been in a situation like that. Nobody? I think you're all lying to me. We've all been in that situation. I'm not busting you or anything, don't worry. But do you know what I'm talking about? Right? You knew it was wrong, but you went along with it because, you know, you didn't want to look uncool or whatever. And that's kind of what, that's not exactly the same with this. There were people in Germany and in other places where the Germans had taken over that knew the Jews were being killed. And they did nothing. Why? It was fear, yeah. They were going to be put in the same situation. But also, there were those that risked helping them to save them if they could. Can you think of a famous girl that was saved but actually then ended up dying?
Anne Frank.
Anne Frank. Anne Frank is just, she's one story. One story. If you watch Schindler's List, Schindler was a bunch of things. He was a war profiteer. He was, you know, he's all these things. You know, he made a bunch of money. But in the end, he ended up saving a lot of people. I think it was in Denmark. The king told the people to help others. You know, so there were a lot of people that were doing this, but there were a lot of people that weren't either. And so, if we allow these things to happen, terrible things will happen. I don't know if this is appropriate right now, but the things that are going on in the Ukraine with Russia right now, does the United States have the ability to maybe stop some of these things that are going on? Maybe, right? We're pretty powerful. Do we want to risk, though, getting involved in that because we don't want to get into a war? Does this sound like 1937-38 with the Munich Agreement? You see how history repeats itself, you guys? It's going on right now. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Hopefully, whatever happens, we don't get into a major conflict. Okay? All right, do you have any questions on terrible things? Okay. I'm going to flip-flop this a little bit so we can talk about... When I went to Washington, D.C., I used to take classes to Washington, D.C. for close-up. And one of the field trips or the places you could go is the Holocaust Museum. The Holocaust Museum is a 4-story building. It's huge. And it's set up inside like a concentration camp. It's so real in some cases where they set it up where if you walk through this, there's this area, you know, it's a room with a bridge that goes across, and on the sides are all these people's shoes that were actually shoes of victims during the Holocaust. And you can smell the leather as you walk through. And then all these pictures are on the ceiling, this brick ceiling. You walk through, and everyone of these people in the Holocaust. It's pretty, it gives me the chills thinking about it. Okay. So when you go there, you get a passport. And everybody gets a passport when they go, when they have to pay to get in or whatever, and everybody gets a passport. Well, the day that I went, the passport I got was this guy named Carl Gorth. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at Carl and his situation, and we're going to analyze it because this is one other story of one person in the Holocaust. Okay? So, let me do that. Sign real quick. I want you to look at Carl's face. Normally I do this as a bell warmer and I say, okay, I want you to study this guy. What do you think what's going on with him, And, what can you say about Carl? If you look at his picture, hold on a second, disregard the book on the bottom, okay? Just look at his face. What's going on with Carl? I'll turn the...
Scared.
Yeah, he looks scared, doesn't he? Okay. Anything else? His head's shaved, right?
He's wearing the clothes.
He's okay. Who wears those clothes? Prisoners do, right? So we can, because we're talking about it already. What kind of prisoner is he?
They're kind
So we're going to assume that he's Jewish, right? And he's in the Holocaust, okay? And then you can see, the eyes, scared eyes, shaved head because they shave people's eyes. What else do they do to Jewish people? To
Tattoo them.
They would tattoo them, right? Tattoos don't come off. Armbands do, though. You take that off anytime you want. So, Carl was in the Holocaust. So I'm just going to read you a story here real quick so that we can learn a little bit about him. So Carl was born in Germany. He was born in a small town of Bad Schwischen, I don't even know how to say it. In northern Germany. When he was 2, his family moved to the port of Bremerhaven. His father was a sailor. His mother became a nurse in the local hospital. After his father died, Carl continued to live with his mother. Carl was 20 when he began training as a deacon at his local parish. What's a deacon? Anybody know what a deacon is? It's a person that's training to be a pastor or a priest. Okay, so he's in training. So if you go to church, a lot of times they'll be helping the priest, Okay, now, question is, why was he, in the Holocaust? Okay, so in 1933, I'll make this a little bit bigger. In 1933 to 39, so we're talking about 6 years. When did Hitler, for the most part, come into play? Well, he was doing his stuff, and when did he become chancellor? 32, 33, right? And when does it start for him? 33, so it was right after then, that point when he became chancellor, that he started instituting these laws. So at this point, he's 26. He says, I was 26 when my jealous lover denounced me, and I was arrested at my house under paragraph 175 of the Criminal Code, which defined homosexuality as an unnatural act. So why is Carl in the Holocaust?
He's gay.
Because he's gay, right? So one of my reasons of showing you this is it's not just Jewish people. There were a bunch of other people that were picked out as well, or picked on and put in these camps also, okay? Okay, so that's why he's there. Though this law had been on the books for years, the Nazis had broadened its scope and used it as grounds to make mass arrests of homosexuals. So if they found out that you were, a lot of people hid it, but if they found out, they'd just go arrest you. No reason, no proof, doesn't matter. Okay? I was imprisoned at the Nuremberg concentration camp near Hamburg, where the 175ers had to wear a pink triangle. Now, I'll show you that in a minute, but today, how are people that are gay represented? By colors.
Red color.
It's like a rainbow, okay? And I think for the longest time, it was pink, okay? I think maybe that's why people make fun of guys when they're wearing pink. I don't know, it's kind of dumb. But, so pink is going to represent, so they all wore specific things so that the people that were running the camps could tell why they were in the camp. Does that make sense? The Germans were master, they took notes on everything, and everything was very meticulous, okay? All right, so that was 6 years. He survived. 1940 to 1944. Because I'd had some training as a nurse, I was transferred to work at the prisoner hospital at the Wittenberg subcamp. So they would have like a main camp, and then maybe outside of that, they would have a subcamp. So if you had special skills, you might work that camp. And then at night, you'd go back there and sleep. You know, it depends on how they had it set up. So you had camps and subcamps and whatever. You could make weapons. One day, a guard ordered me to decrease the bread ration for the patients who were Polish war prisoners. Why are they there?
Because they're Polish.
Simply because they were in the war and they were prisoners, right? And they're Polish, okay? But he refused. Now, what could have happened to him? Could have just been shot right on the spot, but he was skilled. So they wanted to still continue to use him. So anyway, they're not going to just let it go. So he told them that it was inhumane to treat the Poles in this way. As punishment, he was sent to Auschwitz. What's Auschwitz? What kind of camp? A death camp. Okay, it's a concentration camp, but this one's specifically designed to what? Kill mass numbers of people. Okay? Alright. At this time, rather than being marked a 175er, now he's being marked as a political prisoner. He's got to wear a red triangle. At Auschwitz, I had a lover who was Polish. His name was Zygmunt. Now, this is the kicker. Karl was liberated in Auschwitz in 1945. So he was in these concentration camps for 12 years. And that's amazing that he survived that long, right? He gets out, and it says after the war, he had difficulty because of his record of being convicted under paragraph 175. So he survives, and he's still being persecuted because he was gay. Isn't that crazy? So I wanted to show this to you because I wanted to show you that, yes, millions of Jews died, okay? But there were a lot of other people, like gypsies and people that were homosexual, that were being discriminated against as well. Well, and killed, okay? If you look at my other book, I can't read German, and if I was to read this stuff, all these different triangles, and there's some pink ones in here, meant different things. And so, you know, the Nazis used it. You can see also the Jewish stars. They used those to identify people in the concentration camps. Okay? You guys have any questions on that? Yes?
Which one did the purple do?
Which one? It doesn't really say. So I honestly don't. I don't know. I'm not. They all. You could probably look it up online. My picture, it actually doesn't tell me exactly what they know or what they stand for. The only reason I know what the other ones were is because in the passport it tells you. You know. So I know the pink and the red specifically in the star. But I mean, it's all different reasons. You know. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. We're gonna watch.